and welcome to another episode of Film Lovers. I'm Shannon Fletcher.
I'm Tim Schumacher, and we are lovers of film.
And lovers of each other. This week we watched Hellraiser. No surprise, it was Tim's choice.
I was going to say, I don't think there's a lot of guesswork in figuring out who picked this one.
Who picked this one?
Who picked a movie called Hellraiser.
It's another kind of horror, thriller, suspense movie from that same kind of era as Suspiria. So you're kind of on a kick here. We
did draw a few comparisons to that. This movie also features a gratuitous amount of maggots. And I promise both Shannon and anyone listening to this podcast that I am not specifically seeking out movies where live maggots were used. But so far, it's 2 for 2 in my picks. So I'm really...
Plenty of fake blood, too.
The fake blood doesn't bother me at all, but it's just such a specific thing to worm its way into the movies that I pick. I'll see if I can deviate that on the next time anyone lets me pick a movie.
Yeah. All right, I've got the Google synopsis up if you have not seen the movie.
And that might be a good amount of people. Anytime I mention Hellraiser to people, I haven't found that a lot of people have seen this. This really has been kind of buried by history and really flown under the radar in terms of when I think classic 1980s horror movies. I think Nightmare on Elm Street, and I think Halloween and the Friday the 13th movies.
Yeah.
And the reason that I picked this movie is because I feel like this is kind of the anti-1980s teen slasher movie. And we actually just read a Rotten Tomatoes clip that also described it that way. So,
here, I've got this is just the Google Wikipedia synopsis for y'all. Sexual deviant Frank inadvertently opens a portal to hell when he tinkers with a box that he bought while abroad.
I hate it when that happens.
The act unleashes gruesome beings called Cenobites who tear Frank's body apart. When Frank's brother and his wife, Julia, move into Frank's old house, they accidentally bring what is left of Frank back to life. When Frank convinces Julia, his one-time lover, to lure men to the house so that he can use their blood to reconstruct himself. Frank then convinces Julia. So hijinks ensue. You know, there's quite a lot.
Hijinks ensue.
There's quite a lot of goop. Mm-hmm. It's a high goop movie as well as high maggot movie.
We've really been discussing what fraction of the budget was spent on goop in this movie, and it had to be
There was a lot of goop.
This movie made me think of The Thing a few times, just because that movie used a lot of microwaved bubble gum to achieve the fleshy, wet alien matter. And
I think people in the 80s were they must have been kind of fixated on flesh that's forming.
Yeah.
Or unformed, or being maybe that was a part of the arms race, being obliterated via nuclear weapons was kind of on everyone's mind during this phase of American history. And I feel like that's bubbling up, pun intended, in a lot of the movies and what they find scary. Because honestly, the goop is laughable.
It is laughable.
For me.
It's laughable in an era when we grew up with CGI, but I think this is the era of David Cronenberg too, when he's The Fly and The Brood. And David Cronenberg was really bringing body horror to the popular imagination. He made a lot of really good movies that used just gratuitous amounts of goop and things to make things look less real. If your goal is to make something look not real as possible and look like it's forming from another world, and you don't have computers to paint over that, making it look really goopy and wet and just fresh is kind of the way to do that. And I think Cronenberg kind of started that arms race of body horror that a lot of people wanted to, they knew it was popular. They knew it put butts in seats because it was new. And I think other people wanted to put that in their movies as well.
The Rotten Tomatoes score is a split, even score. The critics and the audience both gave it 72%, which is, I think, kind of rare, that the critics and the audience agree.
We haven't seen that a lot, especially on the last podcast that we did with I'm Thinking of Ending Things. It was a huge discrepancy.
I think that made sense.
Yeah.
The critics, there's a little critics take that I enjoy. Elevated by writer-director Clive Barker's fiendishly unique vision, Hellraiser delivers a disquieting and sadistically smart alternative to mindless war. I agree with that statement. This is better than your average slasher by far. Is it a perfect film? No. My hot take, we'll go into hot takes now. My hot take is that this is a fantastic A plot, but they needed a B plot. Like, there needed to be depth to this movie that was not there. They do not go into, there's like, we're clearly in a foreign country when we purchase the box, but absolutely no backstory on the box is offered. We are not given any backstory as to these Cenobite demon creatures and whether, like, what the politics are between them is just like completely up for interpretation. Their relationship with Frank is something of like, they're torturing Frank, I think, but it's really unclear. We're not really given any backstory into Frank himself and what his life was like before he got, I don't know, trapped in this house as like a soul or whatever. Like what his exploits were like, how he seduced Julia is a complete mystery. They have this weird erotic like
that's we see exactly how he seduced Julia, and it doesn't make any sense.
Clearly there's some magic or some you know, dark shit at play, but they don't really tell you a lot. I think that like what this plot or this movie is missing is depth. It's a great A plot. It's a great surface level. Like the key story cards of this film are great. I wouldn't shuffle anything around, but what I would do is add a lot of subtext and a lot of subplot of like the different characters, why they are the way they are, how Frank ended up in this very peculiar situation. It's a really interesting situation, and the fact that they don't tell you how he got there, it just seems like a huge miss for me. But other than that, like, it was a pretty enjoyable watch. I did laugh a few times because certain things that were supposed to be scary just weren't.
Or
like,
dated.
There's a lot of dated stuff going on. It's also like the performances are a little all over the place. Like in some scenes I was like, hey, she's actually doing a great job, like being fucking freaked out in this scene. But then like she would, you know, have an argument with her dad or something. Like there were just the key character, I think, is the daughter. You don't really realize that until well into the film. Who you're supposed to be like root for.
She's the main character and also not in the movie for the first third.
It's really it's confusing who you're supposed to be, who you're following, like whose story is this. All the characters kind of share a lot of screen time. So but yeah, those key performances are a little all over the place. There's some good scenes and some like cringy scenes.
Yeah, for sure. I think Frank's acting, I brought this up last night when we were watching it, that I feel like he was going for Marlon Brando in A Streetcar Named Desire, where he's just supposed to be this like dominant sexual magnetic force that people just kind of gravitate towards because he's aggressive and dominant. And he's a lot more blunt than Brando is. There's a lot less nuance to his character. I mean, you can see what he's going for, but this movie was made in roughly 9 weeks. This is Clive Barker's first movie. I think this movie feels like it's like 75% of a full movie because it explains it's like Lost, where it throws crazy shit at you, and with Lost, the goal was to get people to, you know, obsess over what that actually was. And I think with this movie, it's just not the perfect adaptation from the book. Where
this is a book. It's a whole series of books.
Yes, it's a series of books by Clive Barker. It's funny. He demanded to direct this because he said that previous adaptations of his work were bad. So he took full control over this movie, and he admits that he doesn't know a lot about lenses. Honestly, I don't think the movie looks that bad for a movie that was made in 1987. I think that some of the special effects definitely were not.
Some of the special effects are pretty darn cool.
I mean when Frank pulls himself out of the floor,
that's cool.
You know, I mean, a lot of thought went into that. It looks good.
I think Frank is sort of like you know that exhibit, the traveling exhibit Bodies. I think it's called just Bodies. And
at a museum, or
it was at the Mall of America when I was like 16 or so.
I think that was at the Museum of Science and Industry.
It was traveling around the world, and it was a bunch of like very well preserved bodies in different states of flaying. So I remember skiing, and I couldn't help but think about who all these people were, because they had so many bodies. It was like probably 100 total bodies on display in this thing that came through town like 10 years ago. And I think I went for like a high school anatomy class or something, but it was really cool. And the accuracy with which Frank's he's coming back to material life. So he starts as kind of this goopy, blobby, skeletal thing, but then at one point he is almost all just like muscles and sinew, but no skin. And that looked very accurate. Like, that was kind of, it reminded me of that exhibit. Like, oh yeah, that's exactly what eye muscles look like underneath your skin. And without any cartilage, that's what your nose looks like. And
right. Yeah, and
it's kind of cool.
He makes the comment at one point that, like, he can feel pain again because his nerves are regenerating. Like, the attention to detail and the anatomy, I think, was really cool in this movie.
Yeah, that was very well done. It sounds like they put a lot of effort into that.
Yes. Yeah.
What's your hot take? Did you give it?
I did not give it. My hot take is that this is the anti-slasher movie. It goes in the complete opposite direction of the Friday the 13th and the Nightmare on Elm Streets of the world, where we see the most common trope in those movies is rooted in Puritanism, where you see two teenagers sneaking off to have sex.
What is it in America?
Well, okay, fair. But you see two teenagers sneak off to have sex or smoke a bong out in the woods.
And then their bodies are like ripped apart.
Ripped apart. There's instant American karma for their immoral actions. Whereas this movie, there's certainly karma for the person who seeks out pleasure above all else. And a big theme in this movie is the blending of pleasure and pain and coming to the conclusion that there's really only stimulation or feeling, right? Like Frank sought this out because he was seeking...
I mean, I'm going to be honest, they hint at this idea, but it is not fully explored.
It's not fully fleshed out.
It is not. A lot of things in this movie are lacking some flesh.
I love reading the synopsis of this movie because the first thing the Wikipedia article says is that when Frank buys a mysterious box from a Chinese man in Morocco, and we are never told that he's in Morocco. He buys it from an Asian man. But
he's Asian.
He's Asian. But the article is much more specific than the movie will ever give.
Well, maybe those specifics come from the book.
I'm sure they do.
Because, you are given, just nothing. I mean, that scene is like 14 seconds long.
Right.
Where it's just like he puts money on a table, the box is slid over, and then it's done. Like, you don't learn anything. And I remember even saying right after the opening scene, like, whoa, I was not given enough information here. Like, we have a shiny box.
Okay.
It's like, kind of looks like a little Tesseract kind of thing. It's like special.
It's like a Tesseract, like a golden, like Rubik's Cube, because it moves around, and it's called the puzzle box. You're supposed to solve it to summon these. I mean, they don't tell you that
it clearly has an allure to it too. Like, it's like the ring in a sense, where the people whomever is in possession of the box, their behavior changes.
Right.
It's weird. I wish they told us more about the box, because I feel like that would have made, I don't know, it would just have made the movie a lot more colorful and interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of my problem with J.J. Abrams films, where like the refusal to do some world building and just show you the stuff that exists in the world is frustrating.
There's no world building. I want to circle back to what you said about Lost. I had this creative director who, he called it the 70-30 rule. He was like, you want to make sure you can't give your audience all of the information, because that's boring. You should give them 70% of the information, and you should let their mind fill in the 30% gap.
Right.
So if there's a joke, it's how jokes are structured too. When the person gets it, like a pun is usually 70% explained, and then there's this 30% you figure it out on your own inside your own brain, and that makes you laugh. Like, that leap should never be more than 30%. It's kind of what his personal preference or his like idea was. And I think that this movie, the gap is off. It's like 50-50 or something.
I mean, okay, yeah. Maybe it's 30-70.
Yeah, they're giving you 30% of the information, and then you have to fill in just so much that it's not fun.
Yeah, it's a movie that refused to do any form of exposition, and that, I mean, I think there is a payoff to the lack of exposition too, because the characters are really well defined. Like, Frank is this brutish sexual being who really exists just to pull everyone else down with him. There's no one in this movie whose lives are improved by Frank. I'm not saying that exposition would ruin that, but I think the lack of exposition kind of lets us see these characters.
What's missing with Frank is, like, is he using magic?
Yeah, and that's something I want to talk about.
Is he just a person who's like kind of a cult leader type,
like charisma?
It's just charisma, or was he like? There's a lot of questions,
right? Because the scene that we see where he does seduce Julia on what's apparently her wedding day,
the day
before the wedding, is that she just says. Pretty much says yes to everything right away. There's very little resistance to him, like needing to come in from the rain and then having sex with her on her wedding dress on the bed. And I mean, granted, Larry is kind of limp as a character in comparison to Frank, but like...
Let's just outline, there's a bit of a love triangle, if you could call it that.
Yeah. Maybe a love square, because Frank also hits on Kirsty when he's, Larry's body. Okay. It's a love square.
So, in a previous marriage, Frank and an unnamed dead woman have a child named Kirsty. And then... Frank. Larry.
Larry, yes.
Larry and an unnamed woman have a child named Kirsty. And then Kirsty is kind of a teenage girl when Larry remarries a woman named Julia. And Julia is in the film. On the day before their wedding, or the day of their wedding, Frank, Larry's brother, comes to visit. I mean, he's coming for the wedding, and he seduces Julia, and they have sex. It's a very erotic and weird scene on her wedding dress. And then that's all we get from that kind of time period. And now, in the movie, the present tense is X number of years later, they are moving... Larry and Julia, and Kirsty's kind of along for the ride, but she's like moved out.
Yeah.
Are moving back into
Frank's house.
It's a house. I think it's the childhood home of Larry and Frank, where Frank has been like hiding out a lot. So there's just like lots of rooms with like curious things, and Frank has like built little shrines and weird stuff throughout this kind of creepy old Victorian house. And Julia, who has slept with this guy, is agreeing to move in. Like, she definitely has trepidation at the beginning.
Yes.
You don't know why at that point. So Frank comes back to life accidentally. We'll talk about that. And then tries to seduce Julia again. Or actually had never not seduced her. We're not really sure. But they kind of rekindle this very fucked up relationship.
Right.
And then... spoiler alert, he ends up killing her and then tries to do it to the girl.
Right.
Kirsty, the stepdaughter.
I love that he does end up betraying Julia, because this movie tells you that Frank is the worst human alive in so many ways. And I think that he spends so much of the movie convincing Julia to go pick up people at bars and then kill them in the room that he's trapped in.
Yeah.
Because the blood from these people slowly is bringing his body back to life.
We find that out accidentally. Somebody accidentally cuts themselves. Larry cuts himself, and then suddenly that kind of triggers some magical solidification of Frank's body.
Magical resolidification is an alternate working title for this movie. Refleshification.
Goopy. Very goopy.
And we should talk about the reason that Frank is dead in the first place, right? He sought out this puzzle box, and I believe it's the second scene of this movie where we see what happens when you buy the box from a strange man in Morocco. He solves this box while he's surrounded by candles, and he summons all of these the Cenobites.
They're demons?
They're demons, question mark, because they are demons from the book, from other sources. But this movie never explicitly... I mean, they talk about hell a few times in the movie, right? Like
It's called Hellraiser.
It's called Hellraiser, but there's that great, very well delivered line from Kirsty where she says, "Go to hell," and she hits the box.
She does say that. I think that line is delivered several times.
But
we also have we have some Christian iconography peppered throughout, but it's not enough. It's not enough for me to think like this is Christian or Catholic, hell. Like, it's nothing else is like, none of the demons look like the demons in, Dante's Inferno or any of the classic Christian. It's not really canon. Let's say that.
Yeah. And that's kind of something that I like about this movie, because hell is reimagined for this movie. You don't see a guy with horns, stalking around. The closest thing you see is
no leather.
There's ABCDF plot like several plots away from the main plot where a homeless guy is following Kirsty, just following her throughout the movie. She gets a job at a pet shop, and he is found in the pet shop just eating crickets.
The world's most chaotic pet shop.
The world, I mean, it's chaotic because there's a demon wearing the skin of a man eating crickets just out of the container by the handful. So
it is never confirmed that he is a demon.
Okay, at the end of the movie, he pulls his skin off, and he's like he's a skeleton dragon or something, and he just flies off.
Yeah, that's true.
So
I guess just during, like, she doesn't know he's a demon. She just thinks he's a weird homeless man eating crickets in the store.
Yeah, I think before we actually see him, like, become that demonic skeleton thing, he's kind of a metaphor in there for the fact that, like, people are watching this woman who's, like, in mid-adolescence. She's going through puberty, and people are looking at her sexually now. I think that's kind of what the metaphor is supposed to evoke, because a lot of this movie is using metaphors to talk about how we kind of process our own sexuality and the taboos around them, and Kirsty kind of discovering her own as a defense against people that are trying to seduce her. I mean, Frank's whole thing is literally seducing people to do things that are bad for them.
Yeah.
Like Frank seducing Julia to murder people so that he can have a body again. Or, I mean, that's one example of it. But one of my favorite scenes of this movie is where they cut between the scenes of Frank seducing Julia and them having sex on their wedding dress to Larry cutting his hand on the nail. And we get these flashing images of pleasure contrasted with pain, contrasted with pleasure, contrasted with pain. It's going back and forth.
Well, it's the anticipation of pain.
Exactly.
He hasn't cut himself yet. You just see this, like, rusty old nail sticking out, and then his hand is there. And I think, too, there's, like, the nail puncturing flesh being kind of, you know,
absolutely
a little bit. A little bit of a symbol.
That's a symbol. And then when we see Julie, Julie gets taken to a mental hospital after she runs away from this house. And when she wakes up, the only thing that are on the TVs that she's watching are flowers blooming.
Yeah, a little heavy-handed.
Little heavy-handed, and the way that she plays with the box is pretty sexual, and in terms of just like, you know, discovery and on her own. The movie does you have Frank talking about seeking these demons out, but he never explicitly says why. And then the Cenobites themselves say that we are here to give people the ultimate sadomasochistic joy, which is apparently just being torn apart, just torn asunder. I mean,
that's very Buddhist.
Yeah,
the idea that, like, leaving your body and dissolving your material existence, and then becoming one with, like, the divine singularity is the ultimate pleasure and the ultimate pain, because it's ego death, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I definitely thought about that a lot. I thought that was very Buddhist, actually, the way he talked about his job. Is he a demon? Is he an angel? It's unclear. There is no fixed morality in the system, because the box does good things and does bad things, and it kind of depends on who's using it.
Well, that's why I like it as the anti-slasher movie. Well, it's like The Ring, but it's also just like sexuality in general. Like, it doesn't have an inherent morality, and in a lot of movies we see it being punished or used for a bad thing, but the box, sexuality in general, are also used for positive things. In this movie, flushing demons back into hell. I don't know if sexuality is doing that directly, but the box is doing it.
Yeah, the box is like the door handle to this, like, demon world, hell, right? It's how you raise hell,
right?
And sometimes that's great, and sometimes it's not,
right?
Yeah, that is nice that it doesn't have, because, like, a lot of movies from this era are very clear about who the good guy is and who the bad guy is. Yeah. It's almost simplistic.
The bad guys are the people that are having sex and smoking weed. Regardless, I think, like I said, I picked this movie because it works as an anti-slasher movie, and it's still an enjoyable horror movie, despite all of its vagueness. There's a lot that we don't know about these demons, but you know that they're demons the second you see them to some extent. They're maybe not necessarily demons, but they are... they're things wearing black leather. They're deformed, and they put hooks into people and tell them apart. I think it kind of works. I think the imagery is powerful enough that the movie feels that it doesn't need to explicitly say what they are, but I wish it did.
Yeah.
I think you wish it did too.
You just wish that some world building.
Some world building or some exposition.
The aesthetics are very like 1980s, like a dark new wave music video is sort of what all these demons look like. Like it's fashion. Like fashion was thought about with like Pinhead, the kind of main demon. We're really unsure about the relationships between these demons and like what they're supposed to. Like it seems like you thought that one of them represented a penis.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And then they're all very
not one of the Cenobites, but yeah.
Yeah, these demons I think represent different things, but it's just unclear.
Yeah.
But Pinhead is like has pins covering his face and skull, and he's wearing makeup, and it's very like it looks like it could be a shoot in a weird avant-garde fashion magazine. The vision for it is very cool. But yeah, you're not really told like where the pins come from, like why do you have this? It'd be cool if that was tied to his character, and if he had a character beyond just like being a cool apparition that like kind of has like 3 lines.
And like I could talk it's funny that you say that too, because the movie poster is Pinhead.
Yeah,
he's never
Hellraiser. It's like all the marketing makes it seem like he's a bigger deal.
He's a bigger deal. He's the main character. I mean, he's not even. They never say the word Pinhead.
Yeah,
a single time in this movie.
No. This is what they call him on like the synopsis.
Right. And they call him that because he is named in the book and in movies following this movie. This one thing we should say is that this movie, I looked it up, has 10 movies made. I thought it was more than that actually, but there are 10 Hellraiser movies out there. I remember reading an interview. It wasn't even an interview. It was like a forum post by the director of one of the more recent ones that was made in the 2010s. And it was him apologizing like, hey, I know this movie was not the best movie, as any movie in a 10-part series would not be great. Like I think by movie 8 or 9, you're realizing who your audience is and the quality of the movie that you're making.
I mean, with the right budget, like, I could see this universe being, like, a great thing to play with, like, in a Buffy the Vampire Slayer kind of way.
Yes.
Like, this main character, or I don't know, key character, Kirsty, is kind of young, hot, Buffy-type character, slaying demons, and it could have been a recurring, like, if they could have done more world building, if maybe it was, like, an episodic miniseries or something. It just, they definitely needed more time to like really get you invested.
Right.
That's the issue with like, your character can look really cool, but if he only has one line and I'm confused about if he's good or bad or somewhere in between, I'm not invested. I was not invested in a single person in this movie. When Larry died, I didn't feel a thing. When Julia died, I didn't feel a thing. Spoiler alert. But like you
already mentioned
key characters die left and right, and you don't care because you're not invested. That's kind of my issue with like a lot of horror and slasher films is like, I don't care. Like, unless you enjoy watching like blood spurt, which is just not my thing. Like, it's pointless to watch these films because they don't even make me feel scared. Because that's just not something that scares me. I know that I have the, I suspend my disbelief just enough to remember like this isn't real. And if I'm not invested in the character, I feel nothing when I watch horror films. That's why that's not really my thing.
Well, so you talk about the point of watching movies like this. Did the movie entertain you?
It was entertaining.
Yeah.
I think as a spectacle, it is a cool spectacle film.
Like I was gonna say, this movie didn't scare me because so much of this comes off as more confusing than scary. But I'm also pretty desensitized to a lot of things that are in this movie. And
it's true.
I did
say at some point, if we watched it with fresh eyes in 1987 or whenever it came out, maybe it would have been terrifying.
Because nothing else looks like this movie. Like especially in 1987, this movie has not necessarily more gore, because there are plenty of zombie movies where blood is just flying constantly, but viscera. I mean, they skin a guy in this movie pretty well.
Oh, many people get skinned.
Right. Well, and that line at the end, Jesus wept. There's been a lot of discussion over what that means, and
do you know? I think that are they referring to Jesus wept on the cross?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we have a nail entering.
You have a nail entering a palm. He's in the cross position. I've seen a lot of discussion over what that line meant, and it usually comes into two interpretations. One being that Jesus, when he was subjected to this kind of pain, wept, and I'm better than that. Or it's Jesus wept, but I'm having the time of my life, because they talk a lot about it.
I mean, Jesus wept because he called out to God and God didn't answer.
Yeah, exactly.
And he thought he was being abandoned.
And he is giving his life.
I don't think it was the pain.
No, but that's all that Frank sees. Frank is unable to see beyond the surface level of things, and that's causes him to seek out sensation above all else. He can't get anything out of life, of living as a person, of having relationships, of building anything.
You're reading into a lot. We are not given that information. You are extrapolating.
I'm reading it. I'm getting that information because why else would anyone seek out this box?
Here's the thing. There's no motivations. No, not one character has motivations like proper in this film. We are not told why Frank buys the box. He's just suddenly in this Moroccan-like setting, and he's buying the box.
Right.
We know nothing about Frank. There's just a little bit sprinkled when Julia and Larry are talking about Frank when they first come to the house, I think. Mm-hmm. Larry makes a joke about Frank's probably in jail right now. Yeah. Like, we're given a little bit about...
Yeah, at that point, they don't know that he's dead.
Right. Because, they're talking about his stuff. Why is all this stuff still here? Like, what should we do with it? And that's it. I mean, you're given nothing. He's kind of a bad boy. I think he wears like a motorcycle jacket. Like, you're just given so little information about this guy. So what you're saying is probably true. I mean, like, it's up to you because you're extrapolating from very limited information that's given to us.
That's true. I am extrapolating. I'm just saying that if you have any idea what this box does, any idea, you probably don't know that it's going to kill you and lead you to an eternity of torment. But if we know that Frank sought this box out for any reason, we can kind of discern some motivation from it. He went to Morocco. I'm putting in air quotes because
we don't know where it is.
It's never called Morocco. It is, and the fact that a strange Asian man is selling a box in Morocco is, adds even more questions. I just mean that, like, okay, we see a scene where Frank pays a large chunk of cash for this box. Mm-hmm. Presumably, he has an inkling of what this box does. What leads anyone? Any person to want to buy this box. That's why I'm extrapolating that, because I think we that does shed a little more light on Frank's character if we know that he heard of a box like this, and
I wish we had gotten this,
and he wanted to get on a plane and buy it. Yeah. Right. I wish we had gotten that background too, because that would have made, honestly, just like
a few minutes of exposition,
two more scenes. And it's funny because I read the Wikipedia on this before, and all of the scenes that they talk about cutting are sex scenes. The scenes that were left out of this movie do not advance the plot at all. They do not shed any more light.
Knowing about Frank's sex life before he met Julia and before he knew about this box would be very interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Like, because I think it's sort of unspoken that Frank is a dom, mm-hmm. and he's a sadist.
I mean, that's kind of spoken from how he treats Julia.
Yeah. So he's a sadist and a dom, and he's exploring, like, the limits. They talk about limits. Mm-hmm. At some point.
The limits of pleasure and pain.
Yeah.
The big thing with these Cenobites that we are told is that they look to push the limits of pleasure and pain to the point that they no longer distinguish between the two. Mm-hmm. That that there is only feeling, and whether it's extreme levels of pain, there's no reason that can't be the same as extreme levels of pleasure. I mean, to describe these Cenobites, one of them has like wire pierced through their cheek. Yeah. And we describe Pinhead. He's called that because his head is, pins have been pounded into it.
Yeah, the whole nails on the cross thing kind of comes back of Pinhead.
Right. I think that this movie is really exploring sensation, or at least that's what the Cenobites are about. Now, no human would really want this. There's a reason that, Frank sought this box out, and now he's running from these things. He's trying to get his body back together and hide from these Cenobites or demons.
He's on the run
now that he knows what they do. So it's pretty clear that he wasn't as into this as he thought he was going to be when he bought the box. But these Cenobites, I took away
the idea that he had no idea what the box was going to do. He had just maybe read something about it in some text or something.
I definitely get the idea that like someone told him this box will bring you more pleasure or something, and just left it at that.
Yeah. It's funny, like, you'd think there isn't a drug comparison there, but it sort of reminds me of how that story always goes.
Yeah, I think the gateway drug thing is, I don't know if it's intentionally in the movie, but I think the point is that he was already kind of into rough or, just using roles in what excites him or something, because he is shown as very dominant to Julia. And I think that maybe that's what led him to find the box or something. He was seeking bigger thrills than he could get with human women or something.
We're not given that plot line.
We're not given that plot line.
Totally just pulling it. And it's like it would have been nice. It would have been good color for the Frank character, who we're just not given enough information about. But we are purely speculating at this point.
And we're speculating because the movie's cool. Like, cool. If this was just a dumb, blood-soaked movie, I don't think we would want to know any more about the things that were left really vague in this movie. So I think there's something there to want to grab onto and to explore and understand. I think it's a good movie. I picked it for a reason. I have seen this movie before, unlike the last two movies. I said on our first podcast that if I had seen all of Suspiria, I never would have recommended it to someone that I love to watch that movie. But I do. Part of what draws me to Hellraiser is the story of temptation. I think is one of the movie's strong points in a way that a lot of horror movies don't have, and it reminded me of The Witch.
We did talk about The Witch.
We did talk about The Witch a little bit, and about how that movie, whether you see the ending as triumphant or not, it is at the end of the day a movie about temptation. And I think this movie is, more literally about temptation. There's no.
And that is canon Christianity. That movie is like, we're gonna...
The Witch or...
The Witch.
The Witch, yes.
And I think that it benefits from that because, like, that 70-30 thing, like, they're covering their 70% well. And then that 30% is a highly informed 30%.
Yeah.
Because I understand, like, everyone kind of knows the canon stuff about the Christian Lucifer,
right?
And the story of the fallen angel and like what he does, and it's about free will. It's like, everybody knows kind of that like plot line about the devil in like canon Christian storytelling. So in The Witch, when you kind of see this unseen character whose voice is the devil's voice, you kind of know who he is. You know his backstory.
They don't need to say it.
We don't need, you don't.
The second you see a black goat,
you can fill in the blanks
contentedly. You know something's up. You know something. You don't put a black goat munching contentedly in a movie for no reason.
Right. Yeah. So all the imagery is kind of consistent in that movie. I love that movie because it's tight. There aren't that many loose ends. You know what's going on. You know, they pick a realm and kind of stick to it. Yeah.
And the movie also wasn't inventing a mythology
right.
all
it
by
was
itself.
Like it was telling you a new story within an existing mythology, which is great.
And that's something that I laud Hellraiser for. It is really creating its own universe just out of nothing. And that there are negatives to that. And the negatives are that when you're creating something from nothing,
it can be sloppy.
It can be sloppy if you don't explain something. It just doesn't make any sense. And with The Witch, there's really no room to do that, because with The Witch, if he doesn't explain that it's the literal devil walking behind Thomason at the end, That's totally fine. The audience knows it's the devil.
Right.
When he says, would you like the taste of butter? He's not, the audience isn't supposed to think like,
he's obsessed with butter.
This is the butter man. This is the butter version of Willy Wonka come out of the hills to grab a slave for his family.
He's talking about pleasure.
He's talking about pleasure. And we understand that because of the unstated things of Christianity specifically. And this movie doesn't have a religion to tie itself to because it's invented.
I kept looking for one too.
Yeah.
And what's confusing is they're giving you little hints of it. Like like a couple dolls of Jesus, like Jesus replicas, are in the film, used in either a shrine of some kind, or there's one Jesus that kind of falls out of a shelf at the right moment, and it's funny.
Just great.
So that's kind of where I have some criticisms of like, okay, if you want to stick to Christianity, fucking stick to Christianity. Like if you want to stick to this canon and this story, do it. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Like you can't both be telling a story within let's say greater celestial universe that's totally new and that is the one we've heard about in the Bible. Like, come on.
This version of hell, if it's a version at all, is one that we cannot understand as an audience because we're not given enough information to do that. The scene where Kirsty's in the hospital and she's she accidentally summons the Cenobites. She's playing with this box. We see some pink lightning shoot out of the box.
Yeah, there's lightning.
Which is different than the blue and yellow lightning we see out of the box. Other parts of the movie, we only see the pink lightning with her. When we see her accidentally summon the Cenobites, she tells Pinhead to go to hell, and he says we can't. And they never come back to that. Why not? Why can't you go back to hell? Do you want to go back to hell? Are you running from hell like Frank is running from you? Like, if so many lines of this movie...
There's clearly a lot of hell politics that are just completely unexplained.
Right. I mean, one thing about this movie is that it totally could spawn 9 sequels.
That's
because
there's the Buffy thing.
Yeah.
It could be a Buffy type show where you're getting bits and pieces of information, or like the way that Netflix brought back Sabrina is great because it's like she's going on these little adventures and there's a whole universe. They do little bits of world building and it's nice. It builds over time.
Yep.
And then finally you go to like this hell school where she's learning witchcraft and like you finally get immersed. And it feels so good when you do because you're like, so we've just been getting tastes of this and now we're in there. And it would be really cool if they had done something like that where it's like, okay, we're going to hint at the world and then we're going to actually show you the world. Yep. But we are never shown anything. We get these characters, these Cenobites, we get the box. That's it.
Mm-hmm. It would be like
some lightning. We get
some lightning from the box. We've talked about how this movie is adapted from a book. I would say this is like adapting the Lord of the Rings books without ever telling you what, like, or just showing Gandalf as being this like crazy alien thing that shoots fireballs, and then like maybe in the third movie they say like, oh yeah, he's a wizard. There's a recognizable concept that they're demons, but like it's not like any kind of demons that have ever been shown in media to my knowledge.
Right.
And
they are very ambiguous with whether or not they are evil or good or
even if they are demons. I mean, they're humanoid. They look like deformed humans, but humans nonetheless. Maybe they're just people that have been tortured for so long. And the fact that that's vague, I think, is kind of a negative on the movie.
Or we have, most of us have ideas about what a ghost is. A ghost is someone who's kind of like stuck between realms. And they give me that vibe too, where they're stuck somewhere and they're like...
Well, and that plays into the we can't go back to hell thing. Maybe that's what that is. They're just stuck.
They're kind of stuck between...
We're grasping at straws because we have to.
Talking about this movie is just a practice of grasping at straws.
It's really talking about a movie that doesn't exist. Because we're talking about concepts that were not included in this.
Do you know, is the book a series of books or just one?
No, it's a series of books. And I want to talk about that too because...
That makes sense.
I was reading Something Awful thread on the book series before because this movie isn't the biggest cult movie, but it's got a decent sized cult around it. People, people that see this movie respond to it, I think. I like this movie and I wanted to know if the books were worth reading. And what I've heard is that the first book is like this movie where it has a lot of psychological horror in it. It has a lot of themes about temptation and, exploring the idea of sadomasochism and why anyone would ever want to participate in something that willingly causes themselves harm. And then after that, it really just turns into like pulp fantasy, some pinheads shooting fireballs at people. And interesting. And I haven't read the books. I don't want to talk down to something that I haven't myself read, but I've heard that the book series is kind of disappointing because it doesn't carry the strength of these themes throughout. And I've read Clive Barker's Imagica, and I can believe that because that is a book that is way too ambitious for what it was. Like he wrote that book in 14 months. It's like 500 pages. Wow. And this is an ambitious, creative guy that I think doesn't slow down to build the way that other authors do.
Yeah, I think he could use a good editor.
Or just like a good consultant. Like people talk about George R.R. Martin not finishing his work, and I think it's because he gets so bogged down in the details, he's never going to ever wade through the swamp itself because he wants to categorize and identify every single detail before he does it. And the sun's going to burn out before he can write his encyclopedia. And I think Clive Barker's on the other end of that spectrum where he wants to sprint to the end and forget the details. I'm going to give you some cool imagery. Yeah. And that doesn't make any sense. That's also why I don't like J.J. Abrams movies, because there's so much emphasis on showing you something interesting without explaining it and kind of leaving the audience to imagine the explanation for that. And like, that can be cool once or twice, but like Cloverfield, Lost, like every single thing you've ever been attached to is vague on purpose, and it's tiring because the audience is doing the work for you. You're causing your audience to write their own little fan fiction without giving them anything. And there's a point where that's interesting, and there's a point where that's just lazy writing. Yeah, I bet there's some very interesting Hellraiser fan fiction out there in the world. I don't understand. Any kind of Hellraiser fan fiction has to be interesting because putting yourself in the shoes of any of these characters willingly is, man, this movie is entertaining, but I will say it's not a lot of fun because people are punished for their hubris pretty quickly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, Kirsty is the most sympathetic character in this movie. I think they say that she's 6.
No, I hated Kirsty.
You hated Kirsty?
I hated Kirsty. I thought she was a brat. I thought she had a gross relationship with her dad. She was very consensual. Like,
who did you dislike more than Kirsty, though? Or who did you like more than Kirsty?
Who did I like more than Kirsty?
Who did you like more than Kirsty? Because I think she's the most sympathetic character in a slew of not sympathetic characters.
It's funny. This first 30 minutes, like, everyone's kind of sharing screen time. You do not know who the main character is. I very much thought the main character was Frank. Yep. I thought we were going to follow Frank, who, like, was dabbling in some satanic, sadomasochistic fun shit, and he got stuck in this house, and then he was going to come back. I didn't really realize he was quite as evil as he was at the beginning. Obviously, he seduces his brother's fiance, which is bad, but I hadn't gotten there yet until like suddenly we're murdering innocent people to bring Frank back to life. Right. But I kind of thought Frank was our main character because Julia is very clearly not likable. Yeah. But she gets so much screen time. So you're like, okay, is Julia the main? She can't be the main character. She's just not. She's so cold and impersonable.
That's what I was going to say. She is.
Like, her only character descriptor is like, she's beautiful. Like, that's the only thing she really has going for her is like, and she's like beautiful in this weird, severe 1980s, like, businesswoman way. Right. So she is just kind of a striking face. Like, she's she feels like a prop in a lot of ways. Yeah. And she doesn't have free will because she's like entranced or like she's under the spell of Frank. So you just kind of like, she's sort of this straw man in a way. Like, she just is a pawn. Yes. So she can't be the main character. And then we know a lot about Frank. Larry's kind of seen as this dunce. He's like very unaware of what's going on. Right. So I thought Frank was the main character for a while, and I was kind of rooting for him and like wondering what was going to happen with him. You know, this couple had moved into his house. Thought that was kind of, is his turf clearly. Yep. But then turns out he's evil and he's kind of the enemy, maybe. I don't know. And then it turns out Kirsty, this kind of bratty child who's not really good at anything.
And not in the movie for like the first third of the movie. Like
she kind of ends up being like, it's very, the focus of the camera is confusing.
That's what I mean when I say the structure of the writing is off.
Yeah.
And just kind of,
the storytelling of like, hey, you know, like I know, because I've watched enough movies and television that when you show a glimpse of something for 1 second, it was probably important.
Yeah.
If you know, like there's like just there's a storytelling language when it comes to film editing that wasn't really at play here that much. Like there are some highlights, like the juxtaposition between Frank and Julia doing it and the nail and the hand. That's kind of nice. That's good film language. But we're missing that, especially for deciding who to focus on.
Or who to root for. I mean, you talk about not being connected to any of these characters, and like, if I didn't dislike Kirsty to the amount that you are. I see her.
I thought she's such a little brat.
I mean, she's a little brat, but she's a teenager who has she's doing that thing where she's trying to get on her stepmom's good side, but also she hates her stepmom because she misses her real mom, and her relationship with her father is closer than like I think would be comfortable for most people.
It's weird.
It's weird.
Weird.
It's definitely weird. I think
they're like calling each other in the middle of the night, and like they're just, the boundaries there aren't good.
Yeah.
And then I mean, she's never actively mean to Julia, but Julia is a non-person.
Yes.
Julia has zero warmth.
In a really strange way.
Yeah.
Like she's
clearly like, she's sort of possessed.
Yes.
And maybe she is like this whole time. I mean, Frank clearly cast some sort of spell on her a long time ago, and like she's sort of a husk of a person.
It would this movie would make way more sense if we got like a scene before Frank goes into the house to seduce Julia, of just like him doing something occult. And then,
we need more.
Like, if we had one other instance of him doing something occult, that could explain why Julia is acting like a robot who's being controlled by someone else the entire movie, and it would explain why he sought the puzzle box out.
Right.
Like that's like a 10-second scene of that alone.
I mean, you get the sense that Frank is definitely dabbling in some sort of occult shit based on the shrines in the house, and we keep returning to this scene of Frank surrounded by a ring of candles.
Yes.
Opening the box for the first time. And that's very much a callback to like how you summon a demon. Mm-hmm. You draw a pentagram on the floor and you circle it with candles. That's kind of like a popular image for how to do that. So I think he knew some stuff, but we're just not given a taste of like what flavor of occultism he's into. There are no books. There is no backstory I really wanted a backstory for this box. Yeah. Where did it come from? You know, it has like engravings on it and some imagery, and it would be really cool if we had ever talked about that. Like, what's on this thing? Like if Kirsty had shown it to her boyfriend and said like, I have this thing. It really freaked me out. Like, what do you think it is? Like there's no problem solving. There's never a moment where, you know, we just needed a little exposition about this thing. Like the Tesseract comes from wherever. Like we know that. Even the Marvel movies do that well. Where at least you know where this thing came from.
Marvel movies do that well because they are being as explicit as possible.
They're also relying on a well fleshed out universe full of comic books, right? Yeah. So like the Tesseract probably got a whole comic book in, 1970 something.
Right.
But this, we don't have that. And they needed that. They needed some backstory on this thing, and where it came from. Why did that random Asian guy have it?
Right.
And why was he willing to give it up if he knew what it was? Like, did he just sort of he never figured out how to open it and didn't know, or
that kind of
was he happy to get rid of it? Like we don't even get a smile out of that guy.
I'm not. Well, he's a silhouette. I don't think we even totally see his face. We just hear.
We see his face. I think he's like.
But like
he toothpick in his mouth.
He's in like shadow though, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't get a good look at him. And also that kind of resolve. I'm not going to say that it's wrapped up because it's not. But we get some clarification at the end of the movie where that like homeless guy pulls off his skin. He's actually a skeleton dragon or something.
Right.
He picks up the box out of the fire and then flies off. And then the movie in just some incredibly 1980s editing. The screen turns into a circle and it falls back into the puzzle box, and then you see him selling the puzzle box to someone else.
No, you go back, it's Frank again.
Oh, it's Frank again? Oh, because I thought...
It's the beginning of the story again.
I thought it was him selling it. I didn't realize that was Frank at the end of the movie.
I think it was Frank.
It could be. It definitely could be, but that is kind of how Citizen Kane ended, with the snow globe. So that's not actually how Citizen Kane ends. I was just going to say that this movie takes place in the Citizen Kane universe.
Oh my God.
Entirely possible.
It does kind of make this weird loop, though.
Yeah.
In like a weird Escher-y way, where you're like, oh, and now we're looking at the beginning of the story again.
And that just brings you to say why again. Like this movie is kind of exhausting in how many how many gaps you have to fill in. And like I said, these are not things that were left out of the movie.
It's a fun movie to watch and never think about again. But it's a really bad movie to watch and then do a podcast about, because it's hard to talk at depth about this movie because there are so many blanks. It's just not giving you the information to really analyze it.
Well, see, that's why I thought it would be a good movie to make a podcast about, because it, like a Rorschach test, is vague enough that it kind of forces you to talk about it from your own perspective. And like I said, the gaps that we're talking about in this movie were not left out because there wasn't enough time to include them. All of the scenes that were left out of this movie were sex scenes that the rating board would not let in. Like I read a quote from Clive Barker before we started this podcast.
That would make a little bit more sense. Like if this was just like pornography and it was a loose plot connecting porn scenes, makes perfect sense. Why would a character have depth if it's a porno?
Right.
Why would a box have backstory if it's a porno? Like, maybe this whole thing was just supposed to be erotic and they took all their erotic stuff out because the like advisory board made them.
Right.
And so now it's like a bunch of characters with the depth of a porno, but none of the sex.
This episode will be titled Hellraiser. Horror movie ahead of its time, or confusing porn,
or just like porn without any sex.
Yeah, well,
there is a little bit of sex.
There is some sex, but like what I was reading was left out of this movie was a scene with sodomy and spanking. The rating board said that you can spank someone twice, and that's it. And Clive Barker is like, well, if we can't do it more than twice, it's just not going.
Don't even do either. I agree.
There are some strange standards throughout this movie, and that is just one case of.
I do remember thinking during the sex scene that we do get, like, oh, this was probably an erotic book. Like, this is probably the point.
Yes.
And it's funny I mentioned, like, this movie didn't really make me feel a lot because I just was not invested in the characters. And, like, maybe it was supposed to make me feel something, but, like, just the erotic portion was cut out and edited in such a way that it didn't totally get you there. So you just kind of, it's a pretty, like, I don't know if I was, I guess I gasped or whatever at some of the like painful looking things.
Yeah.
It got a rise out of me a little bit, but not to the extent that I think it wanted to. Like it's just. Like
I said, I don't think this movie is really scary. And part of that is because of the dated effects. But I think if you want to make.
It's not, like the effects are great. I think the effects aren't dated at all.
I'm talking about the lightning.
Yeah, the lightning is dated.
The goop effects, top notch. If you're looking for a movie with good goop, you watch this Hellraiser movie.
Great goop, great body, some body horror.
But you think,
but it's the editing. The editing was cringy, laughable,
and confusing. Yeah. Like cringy and confusing. It didn't do the movie any favors. I think if you're a producer and you see just anything about sadomasochism, you think, oh, I want to put this in a horror movie. I want, that it's something that other horror movies don't have. It's a ground that other horror movies might be afraid to walk. Yeah. And I want to put some sadomasochism in my horror movie. I think this is kind of the result of surface level thinking like that. Yeah. Because there is a discussion of what drives someone to participate in sadomasochistic rituals, but the movie itself doesn't build that enough, or doesn't build the characters enough to get you to think about that. Because after you watch this movie, all you're talking about are, what are those things? Why are those things doing this? Like there's clearly some intention here that is not supported enough to carry that message across the finish line.
Yeah.
And that's why I recommended this movie, because I do think that it's interesting to compare it to other horror movies. And I think that if the US was more liberal in its censorship laws and more allowing of sexual content in movies, I think this movie would have inspired a lot more movies going down the line, the way that the slasher movies of the 80s inspired a lot of the slasher movies of the 90s and the torture porn movies of the thousands, where there's
like Saw,
where like the fear comes from the harm that's going to come across. And I think this movie, again, neither of us really felt any fear in it, but I think the kind of uneasy question that you have to ask yourself when you see a movie like this is, this movie is bringing up sadomasochism because some people do participate in this, and I think it deserves to be more than just a prop in a movie. It's a phenomenon that, just like murder is in slasher movies, that's easy to put on screen and get a rise out of people because it's super graphic and you can put it into something, but it just comes across as confusing. And I don't know if having more sex scenes in this movie would have made it any better or more inspiring to movies. But I think that it's certainly hard to make a movie like this in the US where there's any amount of sexual expression.
Yeah, true. I do think it would have helped. I think that this movie is trying to tell a story about like the sexual exploration, but without any sexual exploration.
That's what I'm saying. Right? That's what I'm saying. And it could have told that story better if censorship standards had been looser and people had been able to express that more. And, this isn't, it just doesn't work because of that. I think it's too constrained. I think that, the saying that constraints breed creativity, that stuff flourishes under really tight constraints. I think US censorship laws are maybe too constraining for this. And, this movie was made in 1987, tail end of the 80s, when all these puritanical slasher movies are already out and it wants to go the other way. But if you're making a movie in America, you can't really go the other way. There's not room to have your movie be aired somewhere and go the other way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't thought about. This really is not my film genre. So, my references are based on trailers I've seen mostly. I've not seen the Saw. I'm not interested into that. Yeah. The Saw series, or I've seen very few horror movies in the 20th and 21st century. But it is really interesting to think about like how those censorship laws shape that industry. Right. Well, how like it's kind of like honestly dictating what horror films look like, because that's like they're so inundated with violence because that's what's allowed.
That's what's allowed.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think is interesting about this movie, this movie shows a person being flayed alive, and that's fine, and they had to cut sex scenes from this movie.
Yeah, that's funny.
That's kind of what I'm getting at here, that this isn't the best movie ever, but I think this would have served as a blueprint for better movies to come had the law's been in place to do that. Yeah. That's more what I'm saying. That's why I think this movie has some amount of value to someone watching in 2020, because it's not necessarily so much it's kind of like a movie from a different universe. Like, this movie would never be made today with this much graphic content in it. I mean, movies have gotten more conservative than that, I think, over time. But the teenage slasher movie where the people being punished are the people that are committing acts that fly against U.S. censorship laws or Christianity in general are the ones that get made. And those are kind of the only movies that get screen time. And that's why we both like The Witch so much, that it kind of told that story, right? Like, it's about a man who's leaving his religious community to strike out on his own. And
he's excommunicated for saying the wrong thing.
Yes. Yeah. He
did not want to leave.
He did not want to leave. His family definitely did not want to leave. He's a little
too proud to say so, but he did not want to leave.
He did not.
He wanted to be respected for his very strong religious opinions. It's not really how religion works, though.
That's it, exactly.
Strong opinions are not welcome.
Right. Or strong opinions. Well, opinions.
Strong opinions that go against the grain in any way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
But this was my pick for...
What's your, not your hot take, but your final verdict?
My final verdict... Would you
recommend this film?
Is that I would recommend this movie to people just because I think it is very different from movies made in the 80s. I think there's some interesting things going on in this movie. And it kind of helps that it's not particularly scary because it kind of helps you think about the movie more. There aren't any jump scares outside of a statue of Jesus falling out of a closet. That is the only jump scare in this movie.
Pretty much.
I think it really goes against genre conventions and the way that you think about horror movies. And the fact that it's such a reaction to other horror movies made in the same era, I think makes it interesting to watch at the very least. It's entertaining. And Rob Elger did a much better job dissecting it than I will ever do. And that his dissection of this movie is interesting. So I would recommend watching Hellraiser. And if you like it, I would recommend checking out Rob Elger's discussion of that.
Is this a blog? Where do you go to find that?
He has a website called Collative Learning where he has an hour-long video picking this movie and its sexual imagery apart. And that was interesting. Like I said, I don't think Hellraiser itself is the best movie, but it's doing interesting things.
Yeah, my final verdict is kind of similar. It's better than like the average horror film from the 80s, I would say. It's got some dated stuff going on. It doesn't check all my boxes in terms of, I think I am just a very character driven person. And if I don't have someone to care about in a movie, I kind of don't care about that movie. Yeah. I just struggle with not having, I don't necessarily need it to be someone to root for. I just need it to be someone I'm invested in, the fate of. And I just didn't get that with this one. Same with Suspiria, not invested in anyone because nobody gets enough screen time for you to care much.
Well, and in Suspiria, I think the characters were even more flat than
they're pretty flat in this one too, but not as bad.
Not as bad.
But for it's an interesting watch. It is, I think, it is aesthetically visionary, just like Suspiria is aesthetically visionary in a way that is deviant from what was going on in mainstream cinema at the time, which is cool. I think it would have actually made a great, like, sexy Buffy the Vampire Slayer kind of thing.
If it had been adapted
in a different way, that would have been really cool.
It's a sexy experiment, and experiments don't always work out.
I don't know if I ever got like aroused by this movie, but it does have some interesting like sex scenes in it that are, not the typical thing. It's different in a way that's refreshing, but it doesn't check all my boxes, that I need personally from a movie. But yeah, I think like the 73%, both critics and audiences gave this 73. I think that's a fair number. It's a C+.
Solid C+.
It's solid C+. Yeah. Like we've got some originality and uniqueness going on. Execution could have been a little bit better.
I recommend this movie not because it's a great movie, but because if you're looking for a horror movie to watch, if it's October and you feel like I need to watch a horror movie, there are very few horror movies like Hellraiser.
Yeah, I would agree. Mm-hmm. Once again, agreement.
This is our third agreement in a row. So high five to destroying the premise of this podcast.
I wasn't sure. This was one of those movies that I really thought I was going to hate on and we would disagree a lot. Mm-hmm. But honestly, like, it is cool.
There's something going on here.
There are a couple things that are puzzle pieces that are missing, but like you can overlook that for the effects, the amount of attention that went into those cool effects, and just the idea. I love the idea of this film. I love the idea of a psychological horror film that's sadomasochistic themed. That's really cool. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they did it justice. That very cool idea, but it's really cool. Yeah. So check out Hellraiser sometime.
Check it out.
We'll see you next time on Film Lovers.
I'm Tim Schumacher.
I'm Shannon Fletcher.
And we are the Film Lovers.
Mwah.